Welcome back to Random Crossing New Horizons. I'm dear darling, as you can see what's going on our lovely island of Fawnhollow. Today, we'll be vibing out as per usual. I did mention yesterday how maybe I'll be doing Happy Home Paradise customization today. You might see from today's episode title that I won't be because, you know, I finished Anarcute, so I'm going to talk about that instead, to be perfectly honest. And, you know, on reflection, I don't think I'm really in the mood to do a Happy Home Paradise customization. I'm much more of a, I don't know, it's a bit of an ambiguous mood where I was like, I was thinking to myself, like, do I feel like doing a Happy Home Paradise customization? And the answer was, no, not really, I'm going to be honest. So instead of doing a poor one, I'm going to, you know, unfortunately, you have lost another Happy Home Paradise customization just to well, I suppose my life, so really, not a big loss in the end. But hello everyone, right now in Fawnhallow, it's 4:07 PM on Monday, August 29th, 2022. So I apologise if you... Wait, he's on Monday? Oh, because we had the bugger followed by the fireworks. That's why he wasn't here on Saturday or Sunday. So yeah, but apologise if you want a Happy Home Paradise customization, if that's what you're here for. But it's okay, you know, we've got plenty of weekends and, you know, plenty of customizations to do. Still, so I'm going to talk about Anarcute because I actually finished Anarcute recording today. On the whole, I would say Anarcute as a playthrough game, like the first time playthrough sort of game, is really fun. As a min-max game, I would say it's actually not so great. I think it's not that it's not so great, it's more like, I think its flaws become a lot more apparent, which don't really matter as much when you want min-max and when you aren't trying to go for the top sort of grades or whatever. That you can sort of gloss over them, but when you actually start going for the top grades, those flaws become much more apparent. But I would say it's enjoyable enough to pick up and play, to be honest. It's very sort of like Pikmin Katamari Damacy-esque, which is I've seen the major comparisons for. Oh yeah, I suppose, you know, spoiler warning for Anarcute, if that's what matters to you too much. Anarcute isn't really at all a story-based game, so hopefully that doesn't really matter. I mean, the story is kind of like a non-element part of it. It's much more like rooted in mechanics. But yeah, on the whole, it's a decent game, I would say. I'm not going to be like, oh, this is my favourite game of all time, it's really going to stick in my memory or anything like that, but I'm not going to be like, I hated playing it. But there were parts where, you know, I was much salty about playing it when, you know, I'll be honest, in retrospect, you know, especially towards some of the later episodes where, you know, it got very frustrating doing those long episodes over and over again, but we'll get to that in a bit. What should we talk about? I think its core gameplay loop is actually quite fun, you know, the basic element style, slowly amassing a crowd, getting more and more power, then sort of like wrecking havoc on the city around you. And it's, you know, quite nicely tied in with these very sort of cute and adorable visuals, with a much more sort of like violent, technically, backstory to it, if you think about it a bit more, like, you know, rioting and the whole thing is, you know, based off like, you know, violent rioting and, you know, angry mobs, etc., for a reason of like overthrowing the corrupt, I suppose, government which have been placed in that game. But it's all like hidden under this very sort of cute and cuddly exterior, which gives it a much more of a feel of sort of, you know, like playing with dolls and toys and like wrecking havoc in the city, like a made-up city in your mind, I suppose, when you're younger, you know, that sort of thing, you know, like Godzilla, I don't know, getting T-Rex toys or something and putting them in whatever, you know, the dollhouse that you got. It really gives off that sort of feel, and I think it does it quite well. It's almost, you know, even... I'm not sure if they should have necessarily, but it might have been interesting to see it go from a more toy box sort of angle. You know, like the impression that this entire thing sort of takes place as like kids playing with like, their toys and, you know, wrecking havoc on everything. But, you know, they didn't have to, obviously. That's just, I'm not saying that would be necessarily better or worse, but that seems like the most obvious angle for me to... If I were creating the backstory of a game, that's what I'd go with. But I think its visuals are cute. I'm not going to say they're not like standout amazing or anything. They're very, you know, simplistic for a reason. That's a very part of the design. Everything looks very sort of like unerringly cute, I suppose. All of the creatures have like massive eyes. They all have like the same sort of very blobby Animal Crossing-esque shaped body. So there's not really much saying where the graphics wise. Could it have been better? Could it have been worse? I suppose so, but really it doesn't really matter. It does what it needs to do, I suppose, is what I'll say. What else? I'm trying to think what order to talk about things. And the mechanics, as I say, and on a whole, casually playing, I think it's very fun. I think it's very fun to basically go around the map, collecting people, you know, getting all these really scrappy fights, like chucking things around, like wrecking and tossing over buildings, causing big explosions. It's all very fun. It's all very sort of like very chaotic, sort of Katamari Damacy-esque. And then with the side part of like Pikmin of slowly being able to amass up an army and then being able to take down greater and greater foes. I think it's pretty cool. I also do like parts of sort of system they put in place for like point ranking, rather than just sort of completing a level. You actually get like separate points and grades depending on how well you do. But the way that grades are done is that they give you 3 different categories. They have how fast you do it, they do how many how many writers you preserved, and how many copies you took down. That's interesting in its own right, because the grade is determined on all 3 of them, but you don't need all of them to be high to get a good grade. As you'll see later, to get an S grade, you only need S grade in 2 other categories, which is not too bad. So it means that you can approach different levels differently. You can go like, oh, do you want to do this one really quickly while defeating a load of people? Do you want to take your time with it and preserve everyone, or perhaps do you want to just like race through to the end and keep everyone alive, like a sort of pacifist route or something? Yeah, I think it's all very interesting in its own right. You can get like a super like a grade if you get a triple S in all category, but I really think some of his levels are nigh impossible to do so. So, I mean, if someone's done it, then by all means that's incredibly impressive. But some of his levels I think would be almost impossible to get S rank grade in all of them. But Anarcute does pretty well, but it has quite a few more mechanics than expected. When I first saw the game, I thought it would just sort of be like amassing things, and then like as you get like more and more, you can get like bigger and bigger things you can interact with. Like you first off start off with like sort of like ground slam, and then you can topple buildings, and then you have like, I forgot what the other base upgrade is or whatever, but then you can choose your own upgrades. I would say some upgrades are certainly a lot better than others. I can't remember ones on the lowest level, but the lowest level ones are like small upgrades. They're all roughly equal. You know, one of them is like you dash faster or further or something. One of them's something else, but one I always use is you get to reload your weapons, which matters a lot more in later levels than it does in earlier levels. Some of the upgrades feel a lot better and a lot worse than the others, I'm going to be honest. Like infinite projectiles and infinite explosives are really, really good, from what I recall. And some of them are really, really bad. Like the one which I unlocked first was the one that when you're charging up, when you press the button, you get a shield which like prevents damage, but it doesn't stay around for very long. So you're meant to use it on reaction, but there's not many things to use on reaction where you would be like, I need to defend my entire squad, which you can't just dodge using a dodge roll in Anarcute. So it ends up being kind of pointless in first place. The charm one also, I basically did not really get it working particularly well, and I'm not sure if that's, I assume what it's meant to be is you're meant to use it for like stealth levels and that sort of thing. So I never really got up time of day, but on the whole it felt very ineffective, especially compared to infinite explosives, because explosives and projectiles in the game are king, and that is a little bit of a problem. It's just the way that the S ranks are designed is there's a, almost every time you want to keep as many people alive as possible, because it's a lot easier to either keep everyone alive and do it like quickly just by avoiding everything, or keep everyone alive and doing it slowly but destroying everything in your path. There's very few levels where you want to do it quickly and also destroy everything at the same time, because as you get fewer and fewer people, you get weaker and weaker. It's sort of like it's a positive feedback loop for when you get more and more people, but it's also a negative feedback loop for when you start losing people, which means it's sort of like your kind of number one priority in a lot of cases, which I don't really know how you would solve, I suppose, without having more like tiered thresholds, I suppose, for the amount of damage you do, which maybe it does have, in which case sort of I retract my statement, but it doesn't necessarily feel that way, especially with a power level being like how many projectiles and how many other explosives and things you can carry being determined by the amount of people you have. But on the whole, that's not really that big an issue, I'm going to say. The different upgrades, some of them could have been stronger, or at least some of them could have feel like more impactful. I kind of just stuck with the same ones most of the time, once I found ones I liked, and that was kind of it. The level design on the whole, I would say it's pretty good. I would say some levels certainly are better than others. Like I would say the payload levels weren't particularly interesting, is what I say. The escort missions are not always the most exciting thing in the world. I suppose it does kind of make sense to a certain degree, like being able to escort like this massive vehicle to help destroy things in your path and keep things open and underway so the vehicle can progress through, but they're not very interesting. Levels, but a lot of the levels do a nice job of being quite open-ended, so you can sort of tackle it how you want. You can weave in and about going through all different ways, or you can just go from like point A to point B to point C to point D and just sort of bulldoze through everything in your path depending on how you want to play. I think that's really nice. And it does give way to a lot of strategy, especially when you're trying to S rank levels and keep people alive and that sort of thing. Some of the some of the levels, I'm trying to think of a design of a level which I had most problem with. I had big problems with a lot of Rekovich levels. Like some of the environmental traps are quite annoying to deal with, mainly because in the game you don't have really huge tactical control, and it's not like StarCraft. This game isn't an RTS. You don't have huge amounts of control over exactly how everyone moves. Everyone moves in such an amorphous blob, and they have to obviously have some sort of like, I'm not saying AI, but the characters try to move smartly to try and stick together as much as possible. Sometimes they move in absolutely just mind-baffling ways where they have no sense of like self-preservation. A lot of times they end up running into lasers by accident when you didn't really mean to. It's a bit hard to direct exactly your blob, especially when they start to get a little bit more scattered, because it's sort of like, since I don't control one person, I don't really know like where like the center of mass is on my blob, so I don't really know what direction I need to press to go in certain directions. That became most apparent, I think, in the pier sections in Miami, especially, which is a shame because I really like Miami. It's my favourite world. But it became quite apparent in those where, especially when I was traversing the piers, I got very confused my first time through, because I was just like, I don't know exactly how to move on these. My general advice, I suppose, if you're playing a game and get stuck in that sort of thing, is just move in a general direction that the game actually kind of tries to sort it out for you. It doesn't communicate it very well to you. Is a bit of a problem. But again, that's not really a big problem. But the lack of control you have ends up being a bigger problem when you start S-ranking things, but we'll get onto that in a bit. The game has quite a few different mechanics, and they're all quite interesting. Like, the weapons are quite nice. I would say they do end up overlapping a little bit. Like, there's not too much like strategy to use so much differently for all of them. Like, you basically, I mean, by the fact that you don't have many controls in the first place, you are forced to basically use them the same way. Was you like hold down a button, aim, fire, and then the only way you really have much of a difference in how and when you use them. So like the machine guns you can use for much further away than lasers. You kind of have to be quite close, otherwise it's not going to hit anything. More interestingly, is the fact that you get a laser weapon quite early on, which has a unique property of it being able to be used in combat and also out of combat to sort of like clear paths, which could help open like more varieties up to you, or more weapons or shortcuts, etc, etc. But it's interesting that the other weapons don't get really something as much as that. I know like the electric zapper thing can disable mines, but honestly that kind of sucks as an ability, as a secondary ability. It only really matters when you hack electric towers, I feel like, and there's mines deliberately placed around them, which kind of feels a bit arbitrary in the first place. It's sort of just like it's designed that way to be useful, which, I'm not going to say it's bad necessarily, but it's not that enticing. And I never really felt like there was many strategic points where I was like, I disabled the mines, and this, led to my victory, especially with how finicky the mines are when you throw them a lot of the time. And this is where like the control actually starts becoming an issue, even when you're casually going through the game, is because you have a lack of control, because you basically play as up to like 60-70 characters at once as one amorphous blob. And the biggest thing is the game has like an inbuilt sort of physics. It's got ragdoll, I don't know how to describe it, but ragdoll physics kind of entire thing, like with buildings all built up of separate sections, and they leave actual debris about you. When you chuck things, you can actually get things caught on other debris which is standing in your way, which is actually really, really annoying, as it turns out. Less so when you're casually playing through, but it becomes a real nightmare when you're trying to S-rank things properly, or trying to like basically bait out people trying to hit something trying to chuck a projectile or something, and then it just like collides with a lamppost. But because you have no way to aim, you had no decision over who threw what, you don't really have much of it doesn't feel like you have much control, which is kind of a point of a game of Anarcute. Is it's meant to feel chaotic and riot-worthy, which is fine. That's fine for a casual playthrough, but when you actually play through trying to S-rank things, you kind of need a lot more finesse and control over things to actually feel like you have a sort of like agency over trying to get this highest rank you can. Otherwise, there were so many times in like later levels I ended up getting quite frustrated, namely through Rekovich, which I'll get onto, because of a lack of control that you feel like you have. Being like, I'm trying to chuck this thing over these mines, but like the wrong person keeps chucking things, or like the person who's holding like a really big object chucks things, but I wanted a small thing to be chucked. You don't, like, at least in Pikmin, you have like a control over like exactly which type of Pikmin you chuck, and you can even choose if you wanted a flowered Pikmin or like a leafed Pikmin. In this game, you don't have it. You can only choose, is it a projectile, is it an explosive, which is kind of like iffy as well. It's like, okay, I want to chuck an explosive. I'm trying to fight enemies. I want an instant explosive, but then, you know, you chuck your mine, or you chuck your battery, and then it misses, and then it like actually becomes hostile in a certain sense because it doesn't actually blow up the enemies. It just becomes a trap on the ground, which is a bit annoying. Or if you're trying to blow up a gate and you'd be like, okay, I don't want to use up my instant explosive cars because that's what I want to use in combat. I want to use a mine, but then it doesn't throw the mine, or you throw something else. It's sort of just like it's small things like that, which on the whole in the casual playthrough don't matter. But when as I say, when you are trying to S-rank, when you are trying to get best scores possible and try and do things exactly as you want them to do, the fact that things are so chaotically designed in mechanics in the first place means that lack of agency becomes a lot more apparent and becomes a lot more frustrating to try and work around with. Yeah, and especially with a dash as well, being a fixed distance, it's fine, it's like an interesting mechanic, but the problem is like all your writers sort of like scatter out in like, not scatter so much, but they don't keep together in like a really tightly knit group a lot of the time, which means that things get like quite hectic. If you end up dashing, you can very easily end up dashing accidentally into a trap, which just kind of means like you just don't dash a lot of the time if you really want to be careful. But because everything moves as a weird sort of ever-changing shape blob, that's quite hard to control in its own right. But I think that one's actually quite easy. That one could be quite easily solved if there was a button like in Pikmin where Olimar has like his whistle to bring all his Pikmin really close to him, or if you had the charge whistle. Just one of those would be quite nice, I think, in Anarchy, just like a button to be like, okay, regroup or something, so then they all like recoalesce into a more tight-knit group. And then if you like held it down, they would like really stay together as a tight-knit group. And maybe it has deficits, like it's quite hard to do combat in that way because only the outer ring of people can actually attack people instead of mobbing people. But it would be really nice when you need those precision sections for actually navigating things. Like there's a lot of things later on where there's like laser mazes which you have to navigate your way through, and it's quite hard to do it with any sense of precision. To be fair to the game's credit, though, it does seem like the writers at least have some sort of like programming in them to basically be like, try and avoid dangers, but you know, because the controls are so confusing in the first place, if you can end up overwriting controls and end up, you know, causing untoward damage towards your writers in the first place, which you might be like, that's a you issue. Yeah, it is technically a me issue, but it is like an annoying me issue where it's sort of like it's not as smooth as I suppose it could be. The world design, I think, aesthetically in general is quite nice. Tokyo feels quite nice, like the Neo sort of like nights. It's a neon light city, sort of like the things you see in like City Pop, etc. I think that works quite well. It seems like they put a decent amount, an alright amount of detail into the thing, so you know, at least the city feels a bit more varied, like with different heights and different signs that you see in all over the place. But you know, it does eventually feel a little bit samey, but there's not really much you can do about that without, you know, just creating more assets, which I understand why they didn't, because that's a lot of effort. What was after Paris? Paris was right. I guess, you know, having like the small city streets and that sort of thing was all really good. Miami, I say, is my favourite, not because of the world design, but because the soundtrack in Miami is so good. It's like, I don't even know what genre it is, like retro, lo-fi-esque sort of thing. It's really catchy and it's really just like, it's very retro pop, maybe. Is that what it's called? I don't know. It's really groovy. Reykjavik, I will say, is definitely my least favourite of all the worlds, and that's because the mechanics they end up introducing just end up being quite frustrating as a problem. Ice worlds generally tend to be quite unpopular with mechanics and puzzle-based levels because slip and slide is not a fun mechanic to interact with a lot of time, because, you know, it's a thing where it's like taking away your agency to a certain degree with mechanics, especially with like precision platformers. People like not or dislike ice levels because, you know, you don't start and stop on a dime. You know, slide about quite sort of like all over the place, which is, you know, annoying to deal with. But at the same time, it's understandable why it's chosen as a thing, because it is an interesting mechanic to interface with. It adds a certain sense of difficulty. Reykjavik has that, which is okay, but Reykjavik also has a load of other things which also make it quite annoying. Like icicle traps, I think should have been like way more clearly communicated. I don't know, maybe. Not maybe, it probably would, and has ended up being like an error on my behalf, that I just, for a huge amount of Reykjavik, I didn't understand what was killing me. Like, but basically, sometimes Reykjavik introduces the fact that there can be traps hanging above you. They have like these like wires or like washing lines, or not washing lines, but electric wires, which sometimes hang between buildings with icicles on top of them. But and if you walk under them, the icicles after a little delay will drop and they will just kill any other writers that they fall on. The problem with the thing is that's the first time it was introduced to you that like any dangers could be sort of like above you in the game, at least I can think of, apart from the helicopters, which are very bright, very noisy, and have like a distinct sound cue which come along with it. But icicles do have a sound cue of like ice breaking, but it's very hard to miss, and it kind of sort of blends into the environmental noise of that actually happens in Reykjavik. So for a huge amount of me playing through Reykjavik, my writers just kept dying, and I was like, I don't understand why they keep dying. And it wasn't until I actually watched back through the videos that I noticed it was actually the icicles falling. They really kind of like look like an environmental effect rather than an actual trap, which is a bit of a problem. I'd like them to stand out a little bit more, or at least, you know, have a very obvious introduction to them, so, you know, to look out for them. Another one is also the geysers are a really annoying obstacle to deal with. They're basically like hot spots on the ground that if you pass over them after a little bit of time, they shoot up and damage people. But the thing is, the geysers, like, the geyser holes blend in really well into the ground in a lot of the places, and a lot of the times they'll be like hidden around buildings or whatever. I know you have control over the camera, but a lot of times and it's not that you don't think about it, it's that you sort of just like walk around the corner and then it turns out there was a geyser there and you just like lose half your squad, which is very annoying. Not for casual playthroughs. Again, none of this really applies to casual playthroughs. It's all fine in a casual playthrough, you lose a few people, doesn't matter, but when you're trying to S-rank things, and especially when the levels start getting longer and longer and bigger in the later levels, obviously because the things get more complex. Some of the latest levels in the Anarland take up to like 10 minutes to do, which is crazy long. And losing 10 minutes of progress in, you might be like, that's not actually that long. It's not that long, but for a video game level, it's kind of long for everything which feels like it should be quite fast-paced. I don't think they're, like, it feels like there should be, like, levels over 5 minutes, which maybe that's a bit short, but I don't really know. I feel like it fuels the hectic Anarcute sort of fire a bit more than, you know, than a long sort of slog of 10 minutes. Basically getting really far in a level and then dying to something out of your control, whether it be because you couldn't throw a weapon properly, whether because of explosives, whether because you couldn't move properly, everything kept spreading out, or like the traps weren't so evidently clear to you. I don't know what I'm selling to you here, I'm going to be honest, but it's really frustrating to lose all that progress. That's probably what I say. So at least I am glad that they had the 2 S-rank system, so you don't have to S-rank literally everything, all the categories in the game to actually S-rank things. That is a very nice system. I'm going to absolutely give the Anarcute devs that. It's a great system, and for more games where you have like S-rank systems in place, that should definitely be the sort of norm, so you can approach each level differently. But it's also the sort of thing where stealth is a pretty hard thing to do in the game. For so many levels, it ends up being rather difficult. Like, I don't know if it's just my experience, maybe it just lent more into my own playstyle, but it really felt like in a lot of levels it's pretty hard to S-rank any other way except for, you know, keeping everyone alive and destroying everyone, which ended up being kind of frustrating. But probably because I would say this one's a bit like asterisk next to it as a complaint, because if this one probably is more up to me, but maybe I was just really bad at doing things quickly and destroying everyone, or doing things quickly and keeping everyone alive. There are very few levels where I employed that sort of tactic, and normally it would be like boss rush levels where you had to just fight a load of enemies at once. So yeah, I mean, most of my complaints of Anarchy basically just sort of come down to the fact that there are small problems, fine, but the biggest problems end up only rearing their head when you try and S-rank the levels. So if you don't try and S-rank the levels, which is how I recommend you play Anarchy, you'll do completely fine. I think you'll have a fun time playing the game, and it'll just be hectic and good fun. Oh, actually, asterisk, this is actually a really big complaint. You should not be able to die in cutscenes. As soon as cutscenes should happen, your writers should absolutely have immunity, because it happened twice or 3 times even where I lost the level or I didn't get an S rank of a level because the level ended, but then, you know, the cutscene like did a like it wasn't a cutscene, but it was like a zoom in on like the final building like exploding and being destroyed. In a casual playthrough, you're like, woo, that's all great. But in my like S rank playthrough, or like trying to actually defeat like the final boss sort of thing, some village writers died because I couldn't see what was going on, and then I had to restart the entire thing because the score only takes place as soon as the cutscene ends. It doesn't take place when you actually finish a level. That's actually something which I'm like, that should not be the way it is. But it only happened 3 times in my playthrough, so, you know, in the end, not too big a deal, I suppose. The ragdoll physics is sort of like a good and bad, not ragdoll, but the fact that like things have like a collision like debris physics or whatever in the game. It's sort of like a hit and miss because it's really cool. Like it adds to the much more chaotic atmosphere, I think, of Anarcute, but it also becomes just like another annoying obstacle to deal with when you're actually playing the game, trying to S rank and that sort of thing. Because like building debris coming down can end up obscuring enemies. It can also stop your projectiles being thrown, which is very annoying. You had to actually walk through the debris for it to get cleared away. Yeah, and then it just ended up being a little bit annoying, but you know, not the end of the world. Anarcute, I don't know, I feel like the music is one of the best parts of Anarcute. Like, it's obviously got a very cute design, but I'm not going to say it's like mind-blowingly cute or anything. It's not like a simplistic design where I'm just like, wait, that's incredible. Like, stylistic choice. I think it's just like, it's obviously meant to be quite low poly, it's meant to be quite cute in that sort of sense. It's meant to be quite like stripped down. The music is pretty nice though. And I keep going on about the Miami music and the theme song are both fantastically cute and like upbeat and all at the same time. It's great fun. Story-wise, Anarcute essentially has nothing in terms of a story. There's like a corrupt, you know, government who have brainwashed the entire police force, who are now enacting like like a dictatorship or something, and then the writers of the people hadn't had enough of that and they're revolting. That's basically the story, and then it happens like, oh, there's kind of like a plot twist where it's like this baboon guy was behind the whole thing the entire time or something. I don't really know the exact plot. I even got really confused at the end of Reykjavik, where they were basically teasing Annaland, being like, hey, this is a final world that you go to, because I didn't actually understand what on earth was going on in the cutscene. I was like, oh, we won, and then there was like a poster and they all looked angrily at the poster, and I was like, what's even happening? And it's like, oh, there's a surprise, there's another world. And, you know, of course the world was fun, but it's also just like, I did not understand what was going on in the cutscene. I don't really know where the baboon came from. I know he appeared in, like, some of the earlier mobs, because I was just like, oh, who's this baboon friend? Like, we haven't even unlocked a baboon character yet. I don't know how we got him, or whatever. And he appears in a few of the levels, and then it's just like, he's a big bad evil guy. Okay, destroy him, sure, I guess. The story doesn't really matter in Anarchy. It's basically the long and short of it. It's just sort of good, harmless fun. I'm trying to think what else to say about Anarchy. So it's a sort of game where overall I'd give it like a solid 7 out of 10, 6 to 7 out of 10. You know, it's enjoyable. I don't think everyone's gonna enjoy it. It's not a super repeatable game, I would say. And a lot of the levels do end up feeling somewhat similar. It's not like too similar, luckily, but you know, there's only so much you can do, I suppose, with the levels without either introducing new mechanic, which could end up with like being a ridiculous amount of mechanic bloat, which I think Anarcute doesn't quite go over that line. Maybe toes that line, but while also keeping it interesting at the same time. Nearly all my frustrations just come with the fact that it's a really annoying game to S-rank, just due to the chaotic sort of nature. Not chaotic nature, because it's actually quite orderly. Like the AI do tend to actually react quite predictably and that sort of thing, so you can sort of enact the same sort of not method, but plan over and over again. But it also is simultaneously a little bit frustrating when things don't quite go exactly the way you want, and mainly is because of a lack of control you get. The electric towers are really annoying to deal with when they're enemies. It's fun to hack them, I will say, and you use them against the enemies, and I will say, yes, probably they are way too strong when hacked. they basically trivialise any sort of battle, which is a little bit wild, I think. But actually navigating through them is a little bit annoying, because just the movement of like an amorphous group of crowd, and the fact that it has very precise sort of like areas you've got to stay out of. In fact, it immediately locks onto you and you have to escape the entire area without getting zapped, but it attacks really fast and is really strong. It's very annoying. And there's also quite a few levels where you go in and it's sort of like established as a norm that you can take down the towers by like running up to them and mashing Y. But there's a few levels, there's one of them in Reykjavik I always think about, where there's 2 towers I could never take down, no matter what angle I approach them from. So I don't know if that was just a me problem, or maybe it was a bug or whatever. The game did also crash like a couple of times, and I'd be remiss if I didn't like point that out. If it happens during like a more longer level, I think I'd be more annoyed, but most of the times it happened quite early on to the level, so I was just sort of like, oh, okay, that was a bit random. The animals are cute. There's a huge amount of customization, well, not customization, but like more than I expected. Like you unlock huge amounts of animals, you get all the clothes, which is nice, but you had to S-rank everything, which I would recommend you don't do. So yeah, I think it's just like a genuinely quite enjoyable game, but it's not like ironic, but it's not revolutionary or anything. It's sort of just like it's fun. It's nice, I suppose. And yeah, would I recommend you play it? I would recommend buying it on sale and then playing it through, and don't bother S ranking it is probably what I'd say, unless you really, really love a game, because I found it quite annoying to S rank. But you might be different if you're really into Pikmin Katamari Damacy. If you're really into sort of like wrangling a much more difficult control scheme, that sort of thing, you might really love it. But that's not exactly what I love. So yeah, I don't know, Anarcute. I thought it was a nice game on the whole. And with that, I'm going to round off this episode here. So if you have been watching, thank you very much. It's been Animal Crossing New Horizons. I've been Dear Darling. Any likes, comments, subscription, shares are greatly appreciated. Join me Dear Darling Discord. Follow me on Twitter down below. Hope we see each other again. But for now, it's our farewell. So until next time. Bye bye for now.